It was the kind of night that made you question why you ever left the comforts of civilization. The dense forest surrounded the lone camper, Ethan, with a symphony of rustling leaves and distant owl calls. The fire crackled weakly, its glow barely piercing the oppressive darkness of the trees. Ethan had ventured deep into the Michigan wilderness, eager to escape the noise and bustle of city life. He loved the solitude, the feeling of being truly alone in the world. But tonight, that solitude felt heavier, as though the forest itself was alive and watching him. The day had been uneventful. Ethan had set up camp near a small clearing, pitched his tent, and spent the afternoon fishing at a nearby stream. He had even managed to catch a few trout, which he cooked for dinner over the fire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, he felt at peace. But as darkness settled in, an unease crept over him, subtle at first, but growing with each passing hour. It began with the sounds. At first, Ethan thought it was just the usual nocturnal activity of the forest. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching. Normal, he told himself. Probably just a raccoon or a deer. But as the night wore on, the noises grew more deliberate. Heavy footfalls, the kind that no small animal could make, echoed through the trees. They circled his camp, slow and methodical, staying just out of sight. Occasionally, he'd hear the distinct crack of a branch breaking, as though under the weight of something large. His attempts to dismiss it as paranoia were failing fast. Ethan tried to distract himself by tending to the fire. "Get a grip," he muttered, tossing another log onto the flames. The sudden burst of light and heat gave him a fleeting sense of security. But the feeling of being watched persisted, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He scanned the tree line, his flashlight cutting through the gloom, but saw nothing. Still, he couldn't shake the sensation that someone, was out there. Around midnight, Ethan decided to call it a night. He retreated to his tent, zipping the flap closed and settling into his sleeping bag. The fire outside had burned down to embers, casting a dim, flickering light. He told himself he was safe. The forest was vast, and it wasn't unusual for animals to wander close to a campsite. But deep down, he knew this felt different. He had just begun to drift off when a low, guttural growl jolted him awake. It wasn't the kind of sound a bear or wolf would make. It was deeper, more resonant, almost human. Ethan froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The growl came again, closer this time, and was followed by a scratching sound against the fabric of his tent. Adrenaline surged through him as he fumbled for his flashlight and hunting knife. He clicked the light on, the beam illuminating the inside of the tent. The scratching stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. Ethan held his breath, listening intently. Then, slowly, he unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek outside. The clearing was empty, or so it seemed. The fire's dying embers cast long shadows that danced across the trees. But then, he saw it. A pair of eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, reflecting the weak light like twin orbs of molten gold. They were high off the ground, far too high for any animal Ethan could think of. He aimed the flashlight at the source, and that's when he saw it. Standing just at the edge of the clearing was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with the muscular build of a predator. Its body was covered in coarse, dark fur, and its elongated snout revealed sharp, glistening teeth. But what unnerved Ethan the most were its legs. They were bent backward like a dog's, but its posture was unmistakably bipedal. The creature's ears twitched as it stared at him, unblinking. Ethan's blood ran cold. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body refused to move. The creature took a step forward, its claws glinting in the faint light. That broke the spell. Ethan scrambled out of the tent, clutching his knife and flashlight, and backed toward the fire. He grabbed a burning log, holding it out like a torch. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice shaking. The creature paused, its head cocking to one side, as if it understood him. Then it snarled, a sound so menacing it made Ethan's knees weak. For what felt like an eternity, they stood there, locked in a tense standoff. The creature's eyes flicked to the fire, then back to Ethan. Slowly, it began to circle him, staying just outside the reach of the light. Ethan turned with it, keeping the burning log between them. He could see the intelligence in its movements, the way it studied him, gauging his reactions. His mind raced with half-formed plans, none of which seemed likely to succeed. The creature lunged suddenly, its speed blinding. Ethan swung the log, the flames whipping through the air, and managed to catch the creature across the chest. It yelped, a sound that was disturbingly canine, and retreated into the shadows. Ethan didn't wait to see if it would return. He grabbed his backpack and bolted, leaving the campsite and everything else behind. He ran blindly through the forest, the flashlight bouncing wildly in his hand. Behind him, he could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, its growls echoing in the night. Panic drove him forward, his legs burning with exertion. At one point, he stumbled, the flashlight flying from his grip and plunging him into darkness. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, and snatched the flashlight back up just as another growl rumbled from behind. Ethan didn't stop until he burst out onto a dirt road, the headlights of a passing truck blinding him. He waved frantically, his voice hoarse from shouting. The vehicle screeched to a halt and the driver, a grizzled old man, pulled over and helped Ethan into the cab. "What happened to you, son?" the man asked, eyeing Ethan's disheveled appearance and wide-eyed terror. Ethan could barely speak, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "Something in the woods," he managed to say. "It was hunting me." The old man's face darkened. "You're lucky to be alive," he said quietly. "People around here have been talking about sightings, a creature they call the Dogman. Thought it was just stories, but maybe not." Ethan didn't reply. He stared out the window as the truck rumbled down the road, the forest receding into the distance. He knew he'd never go camping alone again, not after what he'd seen. Some places, he realized, were meant to remain untouched, their secrets hidden in the shadows. And some creatures were better left undisturbed. As the truck rolled on, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging thought that this might not be the end. His gear was still back at the campsite, and with it, anything that might hold his scent. He wondered if the creature would track him, if it could follow him beyond the confines of the forest. The old man seemed to sense his unease. "You'll be fine as long as you stay out of those woods," the man said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Dogman doesn't usually venture this far out, but if I were you, I'd keep a shotgun close for a while." Ethan nodded absently, his mind racing. The creature's eyes, its predatory intelligence, were burned into his memory. He couldn't stop replaying the moment it lunged at him, the sheer power and speed of its movements. It wasn't just an animal, it was something more. Something that didn't belong in the natural order of things. By the time the truck pulled into the nearest town, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the horizon. The old man dropped Ethan off at a diner where he could catch his breath and figure out his next move. Inside, the warm smell of coffee and bacon was a stark contrast to the terror he'd just escaped. But even as he sat at the counter sipping a steaming cup of coffee, he couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching, waiting. Ethan decided he wouldn't let this experience haunt him. He'd warn others, share his story, and make sure no one else wandered into those woods unprepared. But deep down, he knew the Dogman wasn't just a story to scare campers. It was real, and it was hunting. Still, part of him couldn't help but wonder, if he'd escaped this time, how long until the creature's hunt resumed?